Welcome to the Lush Life podcast. I'm your drinking companion, Susan Schwartz, and I bring you the how-to guide for living life one cocktail at a time. Thanks to my mother's love of martinis, the first words I spoke were shaken, not stirred, and I've been obsessed by cocktails ever since. Together, we'll learn from bartenders, brand ambassadors, distillers, and others why certain drinks are popular in certain cultures, how to make the perfect old-fashioned, when to shake and when to stir, and so much more. Hear that sound? It's time to cozy up to the bar and let the fun begin. His first love was moss. Then cocktails followed. Our guest today, Gregory Buda, technically Dr. Gregory Buda, having completed a PhD in plant biology, was on his way to doing a postdoc when he heard the call of the New York City bar scene. Now as bar consultant to Dickie's Bar in London, he brings with him a title of Director of Education and Training Manager from the Dead Rabbit, voted the best bar in the world. Listen in as he tells us how he got from science to hospitality in such a short time.
Well, I feel like my life has been a series of hard left turns from when I was a little kid in terms of where my career path has led me. I have always been interested in science. When I went to college, I was originally going to school for environmental policy and realized very quickly that I loved the science that we had to learn, and I really despised all of the law and ethics courses and all of that sort of thing. So I very quickly changed my major and did 2 bachelor's degrees, one in molecular biology and one in chemistry. And it was...
Were you always tinkering stuff when you were young?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I had the little science kits. I had
blow up anything,
little museum in my backyard for all the weird stuff that I collected, and I didn't have many friends in school, as you might imagine.
I'm sure you do now, though, because you can make a mean drink.
A couple good ones. But when I was toward the end of my undergrad, I started to become really interested in plants and decided to pursue a career in plant research. So I went to Cornell.
Was there a specific plant?
I was really interested in mosses, actually. I ended up doing most of my PhD work on moss biology. And I had an advisor that was very patient and accommodating with my interests, which was very lucky on my part.
Are there a lot of different mosses?
There are a lot of different mosses. There are not too many moss biologists floating around. We're a very small community worldwide. But once again, in grad school, I was doing research with the aim of becoming a professor and running a research lab. What I became really fascinated with in grad school was, of course, the science, but more specifically, scientific imaging. So most of my PhD was spent developing new microscope techniques for looking at plant cell lipids. But I also learned how to use cameras from a very technical point of view, doing imaging for scientific journal articles for all the projects going on in my lab, and started taking up photography as a hobby.
So were you going to give up research?
No, that wasn't the plan at the time at all. I finished my PhD, and while I was in grad school, I had started working at a bar in town.
What town is this?
This is Ithaca, New York. I was going to school at Cornell University. Right. So I was bartending at a little bar called Stella's, right in College Town in Ithaca, right next to Cornell.
So are we talking a lot of beers, a lot of Jello shots, that kind of thing?
This was actually one of the few cocktail bars in town. They weren't amazing cocktails when I started, but it was one of the few places that actually served a good list of cocktails with a little bit of creativity behind them.
Right, because there's lots of grad schools at Cornell, so people can drink. It's over the drinking age.
Definitely.
You know, it's not just undergrads.
There's lots of undergrads as well, and that was a whole other set of challenges because, you know, you have people that are just becoming drinking age the year that they're leaving school. They turn 21, and then they're gone in 6 months. So we had a pretty rapidly changing clientele at our bar. But what started out as a job just to earn a little bit of extra money turned into a passion that I really wasn't expecting. I started becoming interested in spirits, and because of what I was studying in plant biology, that started tying in my head to what I was learning about plants and agriculture and how they can be used in cooking and how they can be used to make booze, to make wine, to make whiskey.
And this was all while you were doing your degree?
Yeah, I was just reading on my free time. I was bringing in stuff that I was learning in Cornell and kind of applying it a little bit to what I was doing behind the bar, just for fun.
And were the owners of the bar up with this?
Yeah, they were very happy with that. A couple of years into that job, the ownership of the restaurant changed, and the people that bought it were investors but had no experience running a bar. So they turned over the management of their whole business to me and 4 other people. So we each kind of had our own departments. We had a head chef, we had a general manager. I was put in charge of the bar, and that was my deer in headlights moment. I'm like, wow, I really don't know anything. So I started reading a lot more. I went to New York City and visited all the top bars and started meeting people and taking some classes.
Well, then what were the top bars in New York?
At that point, I went to Milk and Honey, which was still open at the time. I went to Pegu Club, Clover Club in Brooklyn, Employees Only.
So it had already started. The whole cocktail culture had started
sure.
in New York. So great places to learn.
Yeah, we were still climbing. We were still riding the crest of that wave. But being in such a small town, cocktail culture definitely hits the major cities long before it makes it out into the rural spots. So what I wanted to do for the bar was pretty far ahead of anything that was going on in Ithaca at the time.
And your professors at Cornell, did they know that you were doing this?
They did.
Did they come in for a drink sometimes?
They did. I was always a little nervous because technically you're not supposed to have a job while you're in grad school because you're being paid a stipend to do basically as much research as you can fit into a day. But
this could be called research, but a different kind of.
But my advisor was fine with it. I obviously kept him in the loop.
Right.
I always did my work and got everything in on time. So.
And how about your parents?
That was a hard conversation.
Well, we'll talk about that in a sec.
Several hard conversations, but...
Did they know that you were doing this at the same time?
They knew that I was working at the bar. They were totally fine with that. But what started out as, a couple nights a week just bartending for some extra money turned into managing a business while I was in grad school. But I finished my PhD in record time. I got some amazing publications.
So you're Dr. Buda, really?
Yeah, I guess so. It's not what I go by. But after grad school, I intended to do a postdoc and kind of continue on the path, but I decided to take a little bit of a break and travel for a while, and halfway through those travels, I found myself thinking, I'm still young. I'm not ready to give up on bartending yet. I want to have a little bit more fun before I settle into a life.
Now, were you going to do your post-grad at Cornell still?
No, I was looking at.
So
other
you had left that
universities.
bar. You'd said bye to that bar.
Yeah.
You were.
Yeah, when I left
untethered.
Ithaca, I packed up my house into a storage unit and got a backpack and went to the South Pacific for several months.
But you still heard that voice saying...
A little bit, yeah. I wasn't quite ready to drop it, yeah. So my plan was to move to New York, play in the bar industry for a year, and then continue on my way.
And how many years ago was
Here we are, 5.5 years later.
Not so much time. That's fast.
Not too much time. Too much time. But...
all right, so then when you told your parents... sorry, this is too intimate, but...
it was a hard conversation. My parents are very proud of me, and they've always been very supportive of my interests. And I think for them, it was a very jarring piece of news that I was giving up a sure thing in research with a steady career and tenure track and a very stable sort of job, and pouring beers in New York. I guess that's how they thought of it. And I think, even working at Stella's in Ithaca for several years and having them come visit, I don't think it quite clicked with them. My parents, they don't come from a background where going out to eat and drink is a normal thing. We would always cook at home through my childhood. Going out was a very special and rare treat. So I don't think it was until they came to visit me in New York and saw me at the Dead Rabbit and I took them around to some of the restaurants and bars in New York, that it clicked with them, the sort of industry that I had gotten myself into. It wasn't just slinging beers and shots across a bar until 5 a.m. to loud music. Like, there was a lot of passion and science that goes into what I'm doing, and I don't think they appreciated that until they saw it firsthand.
Absolutely. I think
and
that
then the
earlier
changed.
generations think of a bartender as a completely different thing than it is now. So they have, definitely my family has seen through what I've done that a bar isn't just a bar. A bartender isn't just a bartender anymore.
Yeah.
So back to New York, though. When was Dead Rabbit your first job there?
It wasn't, actually. I've worked at several jobs in New York in the bar industry. I started off working as a barback at one of my absolute favorite bars in the world called the Beagle. It was a little cocktail bar on the Lower East Side. I had met the owners when I had come down as Stella's bar manager to take a cocktail class that they were teaching, and had introduced myself. And when I moved to New York, they were my first stop after I dropped my bags off, was to say, hey, can I work for you guys? They didn't have any bartending spots open, but they asked if I was willing to bar back for a short while, and I said absolutely. I think I learned more bar backing for those guys in 2 months than I learned in 6 years of working and running a bar upstate. Like, the level, the quality, the thought that goes into it, it was just a whole nother world. And that was in New York, kind of the moment that I was like, wow, this is not what I thought it was going to be. It's so cool. So I transitioned into bartending there. I was also working at a wine bar in Midtown East for a little while, and ended up opening a bar on the Upper West Side, not as an owner, but as the opening bar manager up there. But the Beagle eventually closed, and when it closed, I was passed off to have a conversation with Jack and Sean, who are the owners of Dead Rabbit, and I came highly recommended from the Beagle, and they had a bartender leaving, and it was a perfect transition. I got really lucky. I bugged them for a couple weeks, and then I had a job almost the day after the Beagle closed. And
that's fantastic. And how long had Dead Rabbit been open?
Only a few months at that point. By the time I started
you were really
working
there at the beginning.
It was September, October when I started working at Dead Rabbit, and they opened up in February. So it was like 5-6 months in.
Did you know right away that this was a bar that was destined to be the best bar in the world?
It became very quickly apparent to me. It was a very intense place to work. I'd never experienced anything like that before. They were ruthless in terms of attention to detail, and everything was thought out to an extent that I had never seen in a business before. And I came later to learn that the people behind it, they had every intention of opening the world's best bar 3 years before it was even a thing. Like, it wasn't, this is a great bar, look how far we've come, this is what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it. They had a plan laid out for everything. It was really incredible to watch.
And were you able to fulfill that need, I guess, as a researcher, to plan things and try things? And
definitely, yeah.
Did you ever miss that?
I definitely miss that still. There are pros and cons to being behind a bar, and there are pros and cons to spending your day in a lab. And I think I definitely miss being in a room full of intellectuals and having a really detailed conversation about something that nobody else in the world is talking about.
About moss.
Yeah, or whatever it is. Research by definition, it's new, it's uncharted territory. So there's that kind of excitement, there's that frustration at the constant failure, because contrary to popular belief, research is not a bunch of eureka moments. It's a bunch of disappointing evenings followed years later by maybe one eureka moment. It can be pretty painstaking, but it's really cool to know that you're doing something that no one else has ever done, and that you're maybe helping people down the line, with the knowledge that you're giving. The bar on the other side gave me the opportunity to be very social in a way. Like, it fulfilled that need to see people and be active and moving around and having conversations and meeting people in a way that being in a lab with the same 6 or 7 people won't. So yeah, I definitely miss that.
You've won a lot of competitions. I mean, you've competed in this world. Do you feel every time you create a drink that it's a little bit towards that? You know, you're using your brain in that same kind of way.
Oh, definitely, yeah. There's a creativity that goes into it, and I feel like being a bartender is, at least in the sort of bars that we're talking about now, is it's kind of like being a chef. Like, if to do it well, it requires that you have a really intimate understanding of all of your ingredients and how they work together and what flavors do and what happens when you turn something into a syrup or an infusion or a tincture, and the best way to go about getting a flavor and putting it in liquid form. Like, there is a lot of science that goes into doing that well. So yeah, cocktail creation and menu development, it's definitely fun.
Do you go back to the plants to start a cocktail? Or are you always drawing on that, the knowledge that you have of botany?
A little bit, yeah. Definitely. Usually when I start a cocktail, I start with what we call flavor mapping. I'll have an idea for 2 or 3 flavors that I think will work well together, that I know work well together, and I want to make a drink out of that. So I'm not thinking in my head, this is going to be a martini variation or this is going to be a Manhattan variation. I don't know what sort of drink it will be. I just know that I need to figure out how to get these flavors together in a cocktail somehow. And then you work away from that. You find other flavors that bring all those together, and you figure out the best way to put those in liquid form, whether it's in a spirit or a syrup or a juice. And then based on that, then you start to say, okay, what sort of cocktail could this be put together to make? So that's kind of the last step for me. I'm not saying that's the right way. That's just kind of the way my thought process works with it.
Well, you are as you said, the director of education for Dead Rabbit. How did you transition from bartender to teaching people exactly what you just taught me right then?
Well, to be honest with you, one thing that I always loved in grad school was teaching. I like taking complicated information and breaking it down for people and getting them to understand it. I had to do that when I taught plant biology classes at Cornell as a grad student or a teaching assistant, and I really enjoyed that. When I started running the bar at Stella's, I really enjoyed doing trainings on technique and talking to people about ice and like the science behind making drinks properly, because there is a science to that too. And when I worked at Dead Rabbit, the first couple of years, I was just learning. I was with a lot of big-name bartenders in New York. They were my colleagues now, and I was watching them constantly and asking questions and taking notes. And somewhere down the line, I started to condense that into some written material. And Jack and Sean, my bosses at Dead Rabbit, they have always been very unique in that they try to identify in the people that work for them what the passion is and what benefit outside of the normal job description that person could offer to the company. So for me, they watched me teach other bartenders or stages that would come through, and they're like, you're really good at that. So we worked together to develop that into a position. And especially since Dead Rabbit is now not alone, we did a consultancy with Danny Meyer in Chicago to open Green River. We now have a second bar called Blacktail, and we're in the process of opening more bars, having somebody like me that can kind of oversee the technical aspects of training behind the bar. We have head bartenders, and they do the day-to-day, and they are the leads for creating the menus and everything like that. But my job is to supply people with all of that other information. So knowledge about spirits and the categories and how they're made, and knowledge about strategies for developing drinks, and knowledge about how to stir and shake properly and how to set up a bar. Like all of the technical in the background stuff is kind of my responsibility.
We're here at Dickie's bar in London. So obviously you're coming outside of the U.S. to do these now. How did this start, this partnership?
Well, Dead Rabbit, as you can imagine, being one of the top bars in the world, we are reached out to quite a lot by other bar programs to do consultancies, to do training, to do collaborations and pop-ups and events and all sorts of different things all over the U.S. and a lot in Europe as well, and South America and Asia, actually.
So I guess you could be choosy.
Yeah, a little bit. So my company, Dead Rabbit, gets a lot of requests to participate in some of these consultancies and collaborations. And in the case of this, Chef Corrigan wanted to convert Corrigan's Mayfair's bar into a proper cocktail bar. At the time, it was just a bar that was servicing this beautiful restaurant that we're sitting in. Has amazing food, but they were mainly pouring wine over there, and it's a space that wasn't being utilized to the best that it could be. And Chef wanted to develop it and do a cocktail bar that could kind of accompany the restaurant. So I believe through a mutual friend of his and my boss's, another Irishman.
The Irish connection.
Yep. He reached out to Dead Rabbit and asked if Dead Rabbit was interested in helping out with the bar program. At the time, we were buried up to our necks in opening Blacktail, our sister bar in New York, and my bosses had too much on their plates, and so they asked me if I think they were interested in it. They didn't just say no, but they're like, look, we can't do this as a company, but I think our director of education could be your guy over there. So Chef flew me out. We had a meeting. I talked to them about their concept, and it kind of developed from there. So it turned into my consultancy, not Dead Rabbit's, but I definitely check in with them and get their advice and feedback whenever I can.
And what was their concept for it?
Well, Chef's restaurant here focuses very heavily on kind of rustic Irish cuisine, done in an incredible fine dining style, but kind of going back to his Irish roots. And he currently owns an estate and farm over in Ireland called Virginia Park Lodge. And it's from this farm that this restaurant sources a lot of its produce, a lot of its game. And he wanted the bar to definitely tie in with the restaurant in that regard as well. So the original concept that we sat down and came up with was a cocktail bar with a small list where the cocktails would feature ingredients coming from the farm at Virginia Park Lodge. There would be a seasonal component to it, and a lot of those ingredients that were being used seasonally in the kitchen, you could also find them in the drinks, and there would be a nice little symmetry going on there.
Did he want you to use primarily Irish whiskeys, or? Yeah,
that was kind of a second tier of the concept, was that we wanted it to be an Irish focus, but not exclusively, and we wanted to kind of secondary to that big focus on spirits and products from the UK and Ireland. So we have a very big collection of Irish whiskey back there, but we also use our house vodka is an English vodka. It's not Kettle One or Absolute or something that's not from the UK. We have a good collection of Irish and British gins. We have a good Scotch collection. So it focuses very much on Britain and Ireland. That's not to say we don't do a couple things, with rum and tequila and mezcal, but that's not the focus, I guess.
Can you give me an example of one of the drinks that you thought of here, specifically for Dickie's?
Sure. Let's see, what would be a good... Well, I guess I'll mention one of the brand new ones that's going to be going on the menu in a couple of days. I'm over here doing a seasonal menu change right now. So it's going to be a smoky old-fashioned variation. The ingredient coming from Virginia Park Lodge is bilberries, which are kind of a wild relative of blueberries. So we're doing that as a syrup, as the sweetener for the old-fashioned. And it has a few other things in there as well, but the base spirits are Teeling small batch Irish whiskey, which is a blended Irish whiskey coming from Teeling Distillery in Dublin, and a little bit of Ardbeg Scotch. So again, kind of keeping that spirit focus, Scotland and Ireland, ingredients coming from the farm over in Virginia Park Lodge, and kind of tying that together into a seasonal cocktail.
It sounds delicious. Will you come make me one?
Sure, of course.
All right, well, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for having me.
After our conversation, Gregory led a few of us in a cocktail-making masterclass at Dickie's bar. We made one of my new favorites, the simply named Irish whiskey and apricot. I had to have it as our cocktail of the week. It may sound simple to make, but it's actually almost impossible. You'll see why in a second. In an ice-filled highball, gently billed, 50 mLs of Green Spot Irish whiskey. Then, top with Dickie's dried apricot soda. Give it 5 sprays of atomized cinnamon tincture over the surface of the drink, then serve with a straw and garnish with the dried apricot. I know it's not fair, but you have to come to Dickie's to get their homemade apricot soda because as of now you can only get it there. Also, you would have to make your own cinnamon tincture, which is not a problem, but takes a good 7 to 14 days. So easy to make and to drink, but oh so hard to get. A reason to make the journey to Dickie's Bar. This and all the recipes you hear on the podcast can be found at alushlifemanual.com, where you'll also find all the ingredients in our shop, except for Dickie's dried apricot soda. Thanks so much to Gregory for his time, and make sure you join in a masterclass at Dickie's Bar in the future. Next week, we meet Sam Carter, Senior Ambassador at Bombay Sapphire's distillery at Laverstoke Mill. If you haven't been to Laverstoke, go. Not only is it the most sustainable distillery in the world, but they make some great drinks too. Sam reigns over the place from the Empire Bar, where I get to sit down with him for a chat. Until next time, bottoms up. Thanks for listening to the Lush Life podcast, the sister of A Lush Life Manual. For more information and links to everything you heard, plus a bit more, please visit alushlifemanual.com. Always remember the wise words of Oscar Wilde. All things in moderation, including moderation. And always drink responsibly. Okay, I said that last part. Theme music is by Steven Shapiro and used with permission. Lush Life is produced by Terra, and I'm your hostess, Susan Schwartz. I'll see you at the bar.